Sarah Martinez adjusted her emerald green dress one final time as she stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom. The fabric shimmered under the soft lamplight, and her mother's pearl earrings caught the glow perfectly. Tonight was prom night, May 15, 1998, and she had been counting down the days for months. Her date, Michael Thompson, was everything a teenage girl could dream of. Captain of the basketball team, honor roll student, and blessed with a smile that could light up the entire gymnasium. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, just as Michael had promised. Sarah's father answered the door with his usual stern expression, but even he couldn't hide his approval when he saw the young man standing there in his perfectly pressed tuxedo, holding a corsage that matched Sarah's dress perfectly. Michael had clearly put thought into every detail, from the white roses to the satin ribbon that complemented her gown. Sarah's mother frantically snapped photographs as the couple posed by the fireplace, their faces glowing with excitement and anticipation. The living room filled with the warm chatter of family members who had gathered to see them off. Sarah's younger sister Emma watched from the staircase, her eyes wide with admiration for her big sister, who looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Michael had borrowed his father's pristine 1995 Honda Accord for the evening, and he opened the passenger door for Sarah with the gentlemanly manners his mother had drilled into him since childhood. As they drove through the familiar streets of Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew everyone, Sarah felt a surge of happiness that seemed to fill every corner of her being. The radio played their favorite song, and they sang along, their voices blending perfectly in the confined space of the car. The Millbrook High School gymnasium had been transformed into an underwater wonderland, complete with blue streamers, twinkling lights, and cardboard sea creatures that the decorating committee had spent weeks perfecting. The theme was Under the Sea, and Sarah couldn't help but smile at how magical everything looked. She had been on the prom committee herself and had stayed after school countless afternoons to help create this enchanted atmosphere. As they entered the decorated space, heads turned to admire the stunning couple. Sarah's best friend Jessica waved frantically from across the room, where she stood with her own date near the refreshment table laden with punch and cookies baked by volunteer parents. The local DJ was already spinning the hits that had dominated the radio waves throughout their senior year, and couples were beginning to fill the makeshift dance floor. Michael proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding Sarah through both fast songs and slow ballads with surprising grace for someone known primarily for his athletic abilities, rather than his moves on the dance floor. They laughed together as they attempted the Macarena alongside their classmates, and Sarah felt her heart skip when Michael whispered sweet compliments in her ear during the romantic songs that brought couples closer together under the dim lighting. The evening progressed like something out of a movie, with Sarah and Michael barely leaving each other's side except when nature called or when their friends demanded group photographs. They shared a piece of chocolate cake that the school had provided, feeding each other small bites while their friends teased them good-naturedly about their obvious affection for one another. As the night wound down and the final song began to play, Sarah realized that this had been everything she had hoped for and more. She and Michael had created memories that she was certain would last a lifetime, moments that she would treasure long after they had both moved on to college and adult responsibilities. The magic of prom night had exceeded all of her teenage expectations. When the last dance ended and the lights came up, revealing the gymnasium in all its post-party glory, couples began to make their way toward the exits. Sarah and Michael lingered for a few extra minutes, reluctant to let the perfect evening come to an end. They helped their friends collect forgotten purses and boutonnieres, and Michael even assisted the custodial staff by picking up some of the larger pieces of trash that had accumulated on the floor. Finally, they made their way to the parking lot where Michael's borrowed car waited under the soft glow of the streetlights. Other couples were saying their goodbyes, some heading home to make curfew while others discussed plans for after-parties that would extend the magical evening just a little bit longer. Sarah and Michael had talked about going to Jessica's house, where her parents had agreed to let a small group of friends gather for movies and snacks. Michael opened the car door for Sarah once again, and she settled into the passenger seat with a contented sigh. Her feet ached slightly from dancing in heels, But the discomfort seemed insignificant compared to the joy that still bubbled within her chest. She watched through the window as their classmates continued to mill about in the parking lot, taking final photographs and making last-minute plans. As Michael started the engine and pulled out of the school parking lot, Sarah rolled down her window to let the cool spring air flow through her hair. The night was perfect, not too cold, not too warm, with just enough breeze to carry the scent of blooming flowers from the nearby gardens. She turned to smile at Michael, who caught her eye and winked playfully as he navigated the familiar streets toward Jessica's neighborhood. Neither of them could have predicted that this beautiful evening filled with laughter and young love would be their last. The perfect prom night that had exceeded all their dreams was about to take a turn that no one in their small, safe community could have ever imagined possible. Jessica's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, had prepared their basement family room for the after-party with typical parental thoroughness. They had moved furniture to create more seating space, stocked the refrigerator with sodas and bottled water, and laid out an impressive spread of late-night snacks that included homemade brownies, several bags of popcorn, and Jessica's favorite chocolate chip cookies. The television was ready with a stack of popular movies, and they had even strung up some additional lighting to create a cozy atmosphere. When Sarah and Michael arrived at the Chen residence at approximately 11:30, they found 6 other couples already settled in the comfortable basement space. The group consisted of close friends who had known each other since elementary school, creating an atmosphere of easy camaraderie and shared memories. Everyone was still buzzing with excitement from the dance, and conversation flowed freely as they recounted their favorite moments from the evening. Michael immediately joined a group of his teammates who were engaged in an animated discussion about their upcoming graduation ceremony and their plans for college in the fall. Sarah found herself on the large sectional sofa with the girls, where they kicked off their painful dress shoes and compared notes about their prom night experiences. The comfortable chatter filled the room as they examined each other's corsages and admired the professional photographs that some couples had already received from the school's hired photographer. The first movie of the night was Titanic, which had been released earlier that year and had quickly become a favorite among their age group. Even though most of them had seen it multiple times, they settled in to watch the epic romance unfold once again. Sarah snuggled comfortably against Michael's shoulder as he wrapped his arm around her, both of them still glowing from the magical evening they had shared. As the movie progressed, some of the couples began to drift off to sleep in the comfortable basement setting. Jessica's parents had provided extra blankets and pillows, understanding that teenagers often needed time to decompress after such a significant milestone event. The soft murmur of conversation gradually gave way to the sounds of gentle breathing and occasional whispers between couples who were still too excited to sleep. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Sarah found herself growing restless, despite the comfortable surroundings and Michael's warm presence beside her. She had always been someone who had difficulty sleeping in unfamiliar places, and the excitement of the evening was still coursing through her system like caffeine. She gently extracted herself from Michael's embrace and tiptoed upstairs to use the bathroom and get a drink of water from the kitchen. Mrs. Chen was still awake reading a novel at the kitchen table with a cup of herbal tea. She looked up with a warm smile when Sarah appeared in the doorway, still wearing her beautiful prom dress but with her hair now falling loosely around her shoulders. They chatted quietly about the evening, with Mrs. Chen expressing how lovely Sarah looked and asking about her favorite parts of the prom experience. When Sarah returned to the basement, she found Michael awake and looking around with a slightly confused expression. He had been sleeping deeply and was momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the absence of his date. She settled back beside him and whispered about her conversation with Mrs. Chen, and they both agreed that they should probably head home soon since they both had family commitments the following day. Michael quietly gathered their belongings, while Sarah said goodbye to Jessica, who was still wide awake and showing no signs of wanting the evening to end. They thanked Mr. and Mrs. Chen for their hospitality and promised to call the next day to share any additional photographs they might receive from the professional photographer who had been capturing memories throughout the prom night. The streets of Millbrook were completely deserted as they made their way back to Michael's car in the cool pre-dawn hours. The streetlights created pools of yellow illumination along the quiet residential streets, and the only sounds were their footsteps on the sidewalk and the distant hum of an air conditioning unit from one of the nearby houses. Sarah commented on how peaceful everything seemed compared to the excitement and energy of just a few hours earlier. Michael started the car and adjusted the rearview mirror before pulling away from the Chen residence. They had decided that he would drive Sarah home first, since her house was closer, and then he would continue on to his own family's home on the other side of town. The radio played softly as they drove through the sleeping community, both of them feeling a mixture of contentment and melancholy that the magical evening was finally coming to an end. As they turned onto Maple Street, where Sarah's family lived, in a comfortable 2-story colonial house with a wraparound porch, they noticed that most of the houses were completely dark, except for the occasional porch light left on for safety. Sarah's parents had left the front porch light burning for her, and she could see the familiar glow welcoming her home after her special night out. Michael pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of them made any immediate move to get out of the car. They sat together in the comfortable silence, both reluctant to officially bring their perfect prom night to a close. Sarah reached over to take Michael's hand, and they intertwined their fingers while reflecting on all the wonderful moments they had shared throughout the evening. After a few minutes of quiet conversation about their favorite memories from the dance, Michael walked Sarah to her front door like the gentleman he had been raised to be. They shared a sweet goodnight kiss on the front porch, both promising to call each other later that day to continue processing the magical experience they had shared. Sarah watched from the doorway as Michael walked back to the car, waving goodbye as he backed out of the driveway. What happened next would remain a mystery for 12 long years, leaving families, friends, and an entire community searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. Sarah's mother, Linda Martinez, woke up at her usual time of 7 o'clock the next morning, expecting to hear sounds of her daughter moving around upstairs as she recovered from her late night out. The house remained unusually quiet, but Linda initially attributed this to typical teenage exhaustion. After such an exciting and emotionally charged evening, she went about her normal Saturday morning routine, starting coffee and preparing a special breakfast that she planned to serve when Sarah eventually emerged from her bedroom. By 10 o'clock, Linda began to feel the first stirrings of concern. Sarah was typically an early riser, even on weekends, and she had been so excited about prom night that Linda expected her to want to share every detail of the experience over breakfast. She climbed the stairs and knocked gently on Sarah's bedroom door, calling out a cheerful good morning greeting. When she received no response, she opened the door and discovered that Sarah's bed had not been slept in. The perfectly made bed, with its lavender comforter and carefully arranged throw pillows, sent a chill through Linda's body that she couldn't quite explain. Sarah's prom dress was not hanging in the closet where it should have been, and none of her usual nighttime routine items showed signs of having been used. Linda called out for her husband, Robert, who was working in the garage on a weekend project. That involved organizing his collection of woodworking tools. Robert Martinez initially shared his wife's assumption that there must be a logical explanation for Sarah's absence. Perhaps she had decided to stay overnight at Jessica's house, or maybe the group of friends had made spontaneous plans for an early breakfast at the local diner that was popular among the high school crowd. He suggested calling Jessica's parents to check on their daughter's whereabouts before jumping to any alarming conclusions. Mrs. Chen answered the phone on the second ring and immediately confirmed Linda's worst fears. Sarah and Michael had left her house around 3 o'clock in the morning, with Michael planning to drive Sarah home before continuing to his own residence. Jessica was still sleeping after the long night, but Mrs. Chen was certain about the timing of their departure because she had been awake reading when they said their goodbyes and thanked her for the hospitality. Linda's next call was to the Thompson household, where she hoped to find that Michael had some explanation for Sarah's absence. Michael's father answered the phone with a voice that immediately conveyed his own worry and confusion. Michael had never come home the previous night, and his parents had been debating whether to call the police or wait a little longer before taking such a drastic step. Within an hour, both families had gathered at the Martinez residence to coordinate their response to the mysterious disappearance of their children. The living room that had been filled with joyful prom preparations just 24 hours earlier now hosted a very different kind of gathering, with worried parents trying to make sense of an impossible situation. They called every friend, every relative, and every place they could think of where the young couple might have gone. The Millbrook Police Department initially treated the case as a routine missing persons report involving teenagers who had probably lost track of time or made impulsive decisions after their prom night celebration. Officer Janet Stevens, who took the initial report, explained that young people often made poor choices after emotionally significant events, and she expected the couple to turn up within a few hours with sheepish explanations and sincere apologies. However, as the hours stretched into a full day and then into a second day, the casual attitude of the police department began to shift toward genuine concern. Michael and Sarah were both known as responsible teenagers who maintained excellent relationships with their families and had never shown any tendency toward rebellious or unpredictable behavior. Their friends and teachers described them as mature, trustworthy young people who were excited about their future plans and deeply connected to their families and community. The search effort quickly expanded beyond the immediate families to include friends, neighbors, and community volunteers who wanted to help find the missing teenagers. Flyers with photographs of Michael and Sarah in their prom attire began appearing on telephone poles and store windows, and on community bulletin boards throughout Millbrook and the surrounding areas. The images of the beautiful young couple in their formal wear, smiling radiantly at the camera, became a haunting reminder of how quickly joy could transform into heartbreak. Local news stations picked up the story within a week, broadcasting the photographs and details of the disappearance to a wider audience throughout the state. The coverage brought in several tips and potential sightings, but each lead ultimately proved to be a dead end that left the families more frustrated and desperate than before. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the couple at various locations, but the details never matched up with known facts about their clothing, the car they were driving, or their planned activities. The Honda Accord that Michael had borrowed from his father became a crucial piece of the investigation, but despite extensive searches of the area, no trace of the vehicle could be found. Police checked every body of water within a 50-mile radius, explored abandoned buildings and remote wooded areas, and followed up on every possible lead that came through their tip line. The car seemed to have vanished as completely as the young people who had been inside it. As weeks turned into months, the initial surge of community support and media attention began to fade, leaving the families to cope with an ongoing nightmare that showed no signs of resolution. Both sets of parents took leave from their jobs to devote their time to the search effort, traveling to distant locations to follow up on tips and working with private investigators when they felt the police resources were insufficient. The graduation ceremony that should have celebrated Michael and Sarah's transition to adulthood instead became a memorial service of sorts, with their classmates dedicating the ceremony to their missing friends and holding a moment of silence in their honor. Empty chairs marked their absence, and many students wore ribbons in the school colors as a sign of solidarity with the families who continued to hope for their safe return. The mystery of what happened to Michael Thompson and Sarah Martinez on that spring night in 1998 would haunt the small community of Millbrook for years to come, with residents locking their doors more carefully and parents keeping closer watch on their own teenage children. The case remained open, but as time passed, hope began to give way to a terrible acceptance that the young couple might never be found. Detective Mark Williams had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 15 years when the Thompson-Martinez case landed on his desk, and he had never encountered a disappearance quite like this one. The complete absence of evidence was both puzzling and frustrating, as most missing persons cases left some kind of trail that investigators could follow. In this situation, 2 teenagers and a car had simply vanished without leaving behind a single clue that could point toward what might have happened to them. The detective spent countless hours reviewing the timeline of that fateful night, interviewing and re-interviewing everyone who had come into contact with Michael and Sarah during their last known hours. He spoke with their prom companions, the Chen family who had hosted the after-party, and even the custodial staff who had been working at the high school during the dance. Every conversation yielded the same consistent picture of a normal, happy evening with no signs of trouble or unusual behavior. Williams also conducted extensive background investigations into both teenagers, looking for any hidden problems or secret relationships that might explain their disappearance. He examined their school records, spoke with teachers and guidance counselors, and reviewed their social circles for any indication of involvement with drugs, gambling, or other activities that might have put them in danger. Every investigation led to the same conclusion. Michael and Sarah were exactly what they appeared to be: wholesome, well-adjusted teenagers with bright futures ahead of them. The detective coordinated with state police and federal authorities to expand the search beyond the local area, considering the possibility that the couple might have been the victims of a random crime or might have decided to run away together to start a new life. However, neither theory gained much traction as the investigation progressed. There was no evidence of foul play, but there was also no evidence that they had planned to disappear voluntarily. Financial records showed no unusual activity in the weeks leading up to their disappearance, and neither teenager had accessed their bank accounts or used credit cards after prom night. Michael's part-time job at the local grocery store confirmed that he had been planning to work the following Monday, and Sarah had made plans with friends for the upcoming weekend. Their behavior in the days before prom had been entirely consistent with teenagers looking forward to a special event and excited about their upcoming graduation. The families hired private investigators when they became frustrated with the pace of the official investigation, but these additional efforts yielded no new information. The private detectives interviewed the same witnesses, explored the same theories, and reached the same dead ends that had stymied the police investigation. The case began to develop a reputation in law enforcement circles as one of those inexplicable disappearances that occasionally occur without any logical explanation. Media attention continued sporadically over the first few years, with anniversary stories appearing in local newspapers and occasional segments on television programs that featured unsolved mysteries. Each media appearance brought in a new wave of tips and potential sightings, but none of these leads ever produced concrete evidence or brought the investigation any closer to resolution. The families appreciated the continued coverage, hoping that someone somewhere might have information that could break the case open. Support groups for families of missing persons became an important lifeline for the Martinez and Thompson families as they struggled to cope with the ongoing uncertainty and grief. They met regularly with other parents who had experienced similar tragedies, sharing coping strategies and emotional support while maintaining hope that their children might still be found alive. The groups provided a safe space to express the complex emotions that came with not knowing whether to mourn or continue hoping. As the 5th anniversary of the disappearance approached, both families organized a memorial service at the high school gymnasium where Michael and Sarah had spent their last known happy hours together. The community responded with an outpouring of support, filling the decorated space with flowers, candles, and photographs that celebrated the lives of the missing teenagers. The service provided some comfort to the families, but it also served as a stark reminder of how long their children had been gone. The years that followed brought gradual changes to the families as they attempted to rebuild their lives, while never giving up hope for answers. Linda Martinez returned to her job as a school nurse, but found herself drawn to volunteer work with organizations that helped other families of missing persons. Robert Martinez threw himself into his carpentry business, finding solace in the physical work that allowed him to channel his emotions into creating something tangible and useful. Michael's parents, David and Patricia Thompson, moved away from Millbrook after 7 years, finding it too difficult to continue living in the community where every street corner and familiar building triggered painful memories of their missing son. They relocated to a different state, but maintained contact with the Martinez family and continued to follow any developments in the case. The distance provided some healing, but the questions and the pain remained constant companions. The case files grew thicker over the years as investigators continued to follow up on tips and pursue new leads. But the fundamental mystery remained, unchanged. The Honda Accord never turned up in any salvage yard or impound lot, and no trace of Michael and Sarah ever surfaced, despite extensive searches and ongoing publicity. The investigation remained officially open, but it gradually moved to the back burner as newer cases demanded immediate attention. Detective Williams, who had become personally invested in finding answers for the families, continued to review the case files periodically even as his other responsibilities grew. He kept in touch with the Martinez family and occasionally revisited old witnesses when new information or investigative techniques became available. The case haunted him professionally and personally, representing one of the few investigations in his career where he had been unable to provide closure to grieving families. The 10th anniversary brought renewed media attention and a fresh review of the evidence by a new generation of investigators who brought different perspectives and updated technology to the cold case. However, despite their best efforts in the application of more sophisticated forensic techniques, the fundamental questions remained unanswered. Where were Michael Thompson and Sarah Martinez, and what had happened to them on that spring night in 1998? The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2010, exactly 11 years and 10 months after Michael Thompson and Sarah Martinez had vanished without a trace. Detective Rebecca Foster, who had recently taken over the cold case division of the Millbrook Police Department, answered her phone to hear the excited voice of a construction foreman whose crew was working on a major highway expansion project about 60 miles south of town. James Harrison, the foreman, explained that his crew had been using heavy excavation equipment to clear trees and level ground for the new highway, when they had discovered something unexpected buried beneath decades of accumulated soil and vegetation. His voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he described finding what appeared to be a car buried under approximately 8 feet of earth in a densely wooded area that had been untouched for years. Detective Foster immediately dispatched a team to the construction site, along with the county coroner and a forensic specialist who could help determine the age and significance of the discovery. The drive to the remote location took her through winding country roads that she had never traveled before, leading to an area that seemed completely isolated from any residential or commercial development. She wondered how a vehicle could have ended up buried in such a remote location. The construction site buzzed with activity as workers stood around the excavated area, pointing and discussing their extraordinary find among themselves. The outline of a car was clearly visible in the freshly disturbed earth, though most of the vehicle remained buried beneath soil that appeared to have accumulated naturally over many years. Detective Foster could make out what looked like the roof and partial outline of a sedan, though she couldn't yet determine the make or model. The careful excavation process took nearly 6 hours, as forensic specialists worked methodically to uncover the vehicle without disturbing any potential evidence that might be inside or around the car. Detective Foster found herself holding her breath as more and more of the automobile became visible, revealing the distinctive shape and color that she recognized from countless case files and missing person reports that she had reviewed. 1995. Honda Accord was remarkably well preserved considering its years underground, with the sealed environment having protected it from the normal deterioration that would have occurred if it had been exposed to the elements. The license plate, though dirty and corroded, was still partially readable and matched the registration information for the vehicle that Michael Thompson had borrowed from his father on prom night 12 years earlier. Detective Foster's heart raced as the excavation team carefully opened the driver's side door, which creaked loudly on hinges that had been frozen in place for over a decade. The interior of the car revealed a scene that was both heartbreaking and puzzling, with clear evidence that Michael and Sarah had been inside the vehicle when it had somehow ended up in this remote burial location, far from any traveled road. The forensic examination revealed personal items that confirmed the identity of the car's occupants. Sarah's small beaded purse containing her driver's license and a few dollars in cash, Michael's wallet with his student identification and the receipt from dinner before prom, and Sarah's corsage, now brown and withered but still recognizable as the white roses that had matched her emerald dress so perfectly. What made the discovery truly shocking was the condition in which Michael and Sarah were found. Both teenagers were discovered in the front seats of the car, with no obvious signs of trauma or injury that would indicate they had been the victims of violence. They appeared to have been sitting normally in the car, with Sarah in the passenger seat and Michael behind the wheel, as if they had simply pulled over and never left the vehicle. The county coroner's preliminary examination suggested that both teenagers had died from carbon monoxide poisoning, likely caused by a malfunctioning exhaust system or by running the car's engine in an enclosed space. However, the remote location of the burial site raised immediate questions about how the car had ended up buried so deeply underground in an area that seemed inaccessible to normal vehicle traffic. Detective Foster spent the remainder of that day coordinating with multiple agencies to process the crime scene and begin the complex investigation that would be required to understand how Michael and Sarah had ended up in this remote location. The discovery answered some questions about their fate, but raised many new mysteries about the circumstances that had led to their deaths and burial. The news of the discovery spread quickly through Millbrook and the surrounding communities, bringing a mixture of relief and renewed grief to the families who had waited 12 years for answers. Linda and Robert Martinez rushed to the scene as soon as they received the phone call, holding each other tightly as they watched investigators carefully document every detail of their daughter's final resting place. David and Patricia Thompson, who had moved away years earlier, made the long drive back to their former hometown to witness the conclusion of their son's story. The reunion with the Martinez family was emotional and difficult, as both sets of parents grappled with finally learning their children's fate, while simultaneously facing new questions about what had really happened on that spring night so many years ago. The initial investigation revealed that the burial site was located on property that had changed hands several times over the years, with the current landowner having purchased the acreage only 5 years earlier and having no knowledge of what lay buried beneath the surface. Previous property owners were located and questioned, but none admitted to any knowledge of how a car containing 2 teenagers could have ended up buried on their land. The discovery of Michael and Sarah's final resting place brought closure to one aspect of the 12-year mystery, but it also opened up entirely new questions about the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Had they died accidentally, or had someone else been involved in their fate? How had their car ended up buried so deeply in such a remote location? And why had no one come forward with information about their burial during the many years of intensive searching and media coverage? The forensic investigation that followed the discovery revealed details that would shock the tight-knit community of Millbrook and forever change how the families understood their children's final hours. Advanced testing techniques that hadn't been available in 1998 allowed investigators to piece together a timeline and series of events that painted a dramatically different picture from what everyone had assumed for over a decade. Detective Foster worked with state crime lab technicians who discovered that the Honda Accord showed evidence of having been deliberately moved and buried shortly after the teenagers' deaths. Soil analysis revealed multiple layers of different earth types, indicating that the burial had been carefully planned and executed rather than being the result of a natural landslide or accidental covering. Someone had gone to considerable effort to ensure that the car and its occupants would remain hidden. The breakthrough came when investigators found a small piece of fabric caught on a piece of the car's undercarriage, fabric that didn't match anything Michael or Sarah had been wearing that night. DNA testing on the fabric revealed genetic material from a person who was already in the criminal database, leading to the identification of a suspect who had been living quietly in the community for years. Ronald Hickman, a local mechanic who had operated a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Millbrook, had closed his business suddenly in July 1998, just 2 months after the teenager's disappearance. At the time, neighbors had assumed he was simply ready to retire, but investigators now learned that he had relocated to another state immediately after selling his property and had never returned to the area. The investigation revealed that Hickman had a history of mental health issues and had been struggling with financial problems in the spring of 1998. Further investigation uncovered evidence that Michael had brought his father's Honda to Hickman's shop several weeks before prom for routine maintenance, and that there had been some dispute over the cost of repairs that had left bad feelings between the mechanic and the Thompson family. Witness interviews conducted 12 years after the fact revealed that several people had noticed Hickman acting strangely in the weeks following the teenager's disappearance, but no one had connected his behavior to the missing persons case at the time. A former employee at his shop came forward to report that Hickman had been working unusual late-night hours during that period and had forbidden anyone else from entering certain areas of his property. The most shocking revelation came when investigators located Hickman's former residence and obtained a search warrant for the property. Hidden in a sealed basement room, they discovered journals and photographs that detailed Hickman's obsession with Sarah Martinez, whom he had apparently been watching and following for months before prom night. The journals contained detailed accounts of her daily routines, her relationship with Michael, and his growing anger about what he perceived as rejection and dismissal from both teenagers. The journals revealed that Hickman had followed Michael and Sarah after they left Jessica's house in the early morning hours of May 16, 1998. When they had stopped at a secluded roadside park to spend a few more private moments together before ending their perfect evening, Hickman had approached them with some fabricated story about car trouble, asking Michael to follow him to a remote location where he claimed to have broken down equipment. According to the journal entries, which investigators believed represented Hickman's attempt to document his version of events, he had led the teenagers to an abandoned barn on property that he had been using for illegal dumping of automotive waste. Once there, he had disabled their car and trapped them inside the building with toxic fumes from his illegal chemical disposal operation, causing their deaths from carbon monoxide and chemical poisoning. The entries went on to describe how Hickman had panicked after realizing what he had done, spending several days moving the car and the teenagers' bodies to the remote burial location where they had remained hidden for 12 years. He had used heavy equipment borrowed from a construction site where he occasionally worked to dig the deep grave that had kept his crime concealed for over a decade. Armed with this evidence, law enforcement agencies coordinated with authorities in Nevada, where Hickman had been living under an assumed name and working as a general handyman while struggling with alcoholism and depression. When officers arrived at his current residence to place him under arrest, they found that Hickman had taken his own life, leaving behind a suicide note that confessed to causing the deaths of Michael Thompson and Sarah Martinez. In his final written statement, Hickman expressed remorse for destroying the lives of two innocent young people and acknowledged that his actions had been motivated by jealousy, mental illness, and a desperate desire for attention and control. He apologized to the families and to the community, though he offered no excuse for the years of suffering his silence had caused. While parents, friends, and investigators searched desperately for answers, the revelation of the truth behind Michael and Sarah's disappearance brought a complex mixture of emotions to their families and the Millbrook community. While there was relief in finally understanding what had happened and knowing that their children hadn't suffered for extended periods, there was also anger and heartbreak over the senseless nature of their deaths and the years of uncertainty that could have been avoided. The case officially closed in September 2010, nearly 12.5 years after that magical prom night had transformed into an unimaginable tragedy. The families held a joint memorial service at Millbrook High School, where hundreds of community members gathered to honor the memory of Michael and Sarah, while finally being able to say goodbye with the knowledge of what had really happened to them. Linda Martinez found some measure of peace in knowing that her daughter's final hours had been spent with the boy she loved, even though the circumstances of their deaths remained heartbreaking. She established a scholarship fund in Sarah's name to help other students pursue their dreams of higher education, channeling her grief into something positive that would honor her daughter's memory and academic achievements. The Thompson family used the resolution of the case as an opportunity to return to Millbrook for the first time in years, reconnecting with old friends and finding comfort in the community support that had never wavered throughout their ordeal. David Thompson worked with local law enforcement to improve missing persons protocols, ensuring that future cases would benefit from more advanced investigative techniques and better coordination between agencies. Detective Foster, who had been instrumental in solving the case, reflected on how advances in forensic science and DNA testing had made it possible to uncover the truth after so many years. She emphasized that the case demonstrated the importance of never giving up on missing persons investigations, even when years pass without significant developments or new leads. The resolution of the mystery had a profound impact on the entire community of Millbrook, where residents had lived with the uncertainty and fear surrounding the disappearance for over a decade. Parents who had restricted their teenagers' activities and imposed earlier curfews finally felt comfortable allowing their children more freedom, knowing that the unknown threat that had haunted their community for so long had been identified and eliminated. The story of Michael Thompson and Sarah Martinez became a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to cherish every moment with loved ones. Their classmates, now adults with families of their own, organized annual memorial gatherings that celebrated the joy and promise that the couple had represented during their brief time together. The abandoned property where Hickman had operated, his illegal dumping operation, was cleaned up by environmental specialists and eventually converted into a small memorial park dedicated to Michael and Sarah's memory. The peaceful garden setting, with its walking paths and commemorative benches, provided a place for reflection and healing for family members and community members who wanted to honor their lives. Jessica Chen, who had hosted the after-party where Michael and Sarah spent their final happy hours, became a victims' rights advocate, working to support other families who faced similar tragedies. She often spoke about how the case had taught her the importance of treasuring friendships and never taking time with loved ones for granted. The investigation also led to improvements in how law enforcement agencies handle missing persons cases, with new protocols for sharing information between jurisdictions and requirements for more thorough background checks on individuals who had contact with missing persons. The lessons learned from this case helped prevent similar tragedies and improved the chances of solving future disappearances more quickly. Years later, when Detective Foster looked back on the case that had defined much of her career, she remained amazed by the resilience and strength shown by the Martinez and Thompson families throughout their long ordeal. Their determination to find answers and their ability to transform their grief into positive action had inspired everyone involved in the investigation and had strengthened the entire community.